Now, these are devastating and truly horrific allegations.
Recently, Camilla's former husband reappeared after nearly 3 decades of divorce. Andrew Parker Bowles secretly met King Charles, carrying an old document linked to a financial settlement Camilla reached in the years following their divorce. The paper did not directly prove any crime, yet it was enough to make Charles question how Camilla had once used the relationships and information she gained through her ties to the royal family. Immediately after the meeting, Charles quietly ordered a review of the finances of Camilla's office. Before long, he discovered that many of the expenditures and approval powers were concentrated in a small circle of staff close to her. As the examination went deeper, certain personnel positions and methods of record-keeping also shifted unexpectedly. Camilla at once denied every suspicion and insisted she was being smeared by an old story that had been twisted out of shape. But why did Andrew choose this precise moment to produce the document? And more importantly, will the king uncover the truth in time before this crisis places their marriage beyond repair? In the final days of August, the atmosphere inside Windsor Castle grew unusually quiet. It was not the quiet of a holiday or of formal ceremony, but a heavy silence, as though everyone sensed something moving unseen behind the thick walls. King Charles still appeared punctually at every meeting, still signed documents, still kept a tightly ordered schedule. Yet those closest to him noticed he spoke less, and that his gaze lingered longer than usual toward the windows. 3 days earlier, Andrew Parker Bowles, the man who had been Camilla's husband for more than 2 decades, had appeared without warning. He requested a private audience with the king one late afternoon, when the light was already turning the ancient stone walls of Windsor to gold. The meeting took place in a small room few people knew. Andrew stood upright, his voice low and even. He did not speak at length or offer lengthy explanations. He simply laid a thin envelope on the table and said briefly, "This is something I believe your majesty should see with your own eyes." Inside the envelope were a few sheets of paper, yellowed by nearly 30 years. They were notes relating to the financial settlement after the divorce between him and Camilla. Charles opened the envelope. He read each line slowly. The contents were not an indictment. There were no forged signatures, no clear evidence of illegality that could be brought before a court. Yet every figure and every carefully recorded clause sketched a picture that made the king pause for a long time. The document showed that during the divorce negotiations, Camilla had used information and connections gained through her contact with the royal family to secure an advantage. The other side had been forced to weigh more carefully and concede more than was customary. There was no proof she had broken the law, but there were clear signs she had used her position to strengthen her personal interests. Andrew asked for nothing. He added only a few sentences. "I have no wish to interfere in Camilla's present life, but neither can I continue to remain silent about something I believe your majesty needs to know." Then he inclined his head, slightly turned and left, leaving the king alone with the paper. That night, Charles did not sleep. He sat in his private study, the desk lamp shining on the old lines of writing. He read them again and again. Each time, he saw more clearly that the paper was not enough to condemn, yet not enough to ignore. It raised a large question about the way Camilla had once conducted herself when faced with decisions involving money and personal advantage. The next morning, he summoned Camilla. The meeting took place in an atmosphere so tense, the air itself seemed to thicken. Charles placed the paper before her, his voice not raised, but every word heavy. "I want to hear your explanation of this." Camilla looked at the paper. For a moment, her face hardened. Then she raised her eyes and met her husband's gaze. She denied it at once. "This is slander. Andrew is trying to use the past to drive a wedge between us. I have never exploited anything connected with the royal family for personal ends." Her tone was firm, yet there was a slight tremor at the end of the sentence. Charles did not argue further. He simply nodded and told her to rest. But the moment the door closed, he telephoned the 2 people he trusted most in his administrative circle. He instructed them to begin a review of every financial activity of Camilla's office. No public announcement, no wide circulation. Only a handful of people were to know. Everything was to be conducted in absolute silence. In the days that followed, the atmosphere inside the palace grew heavier still. Camilla continued to appear at the king's side at official events, continued to smile for the cameras. But between the two of them, distance had already begun to show. Charles said nothing more about the paper. He only watched, and with each passing day, he felt more clearly that Camilla's reaction was not that of someone entirely without guilt. If it were merely an old document from 30 years ago, why was she so tense? Why, whenever he happened to mention financial matters, did a flicker of wariness appear in her eyes? After that brief confrontation, the atmosphere between Charles and Camilla was no longer what it had been. They still appeared together at official occasions, still exchanged polite greetings in the presence of others. Yet inwardly, the distance had become plain. Charles noticed that Camilla's reaction had been far too strong. If the matter truly belonged to the distant past, if there was genuinely nothing to hide, why was she so tense? Why did a guarded look appear each time he casually mentioned money? Why did she keep asking whether he had shown the paper to anyone else? Those questions circled in Charles's mind for days. He began to suspect that behind the old document lay something larger, something she did not want anyone to touch. He decided not to rush. Instead of confronting her again, he watched quietly. The trusted team he had assigned to the review began to send their first reports. The results were not what he had hoped for, yet neither did they bring reassurance. There was no clear wrongdoing, no sudden disappearance of funds, no obviously forged invoices that could be concluded at once. But one common feature forced him to pause. The autonomy of Camilla's office was too great, and almost every expenditure was handled by staff inside her own department. Very few people outside knew how money was approved or how it was used. Transparency barely existed. Large and small sums alike passed through the same small circle of people close to Camilla. They were long-serving, loyal, and reported almost exclusively to her. This closed circle made external oversight extremely difficult. Charles sat for hours at his desk, staring at the dry figures on paper. He remembered the years before he became king, when everything had been simpler, when he could still trust the person beside him completely. Now, as monarch, he could not look away. The trust that had once been solid began to crack little by little. He did not want to think ill of Camilla, yet the signs appearing before him would not allow him to ignore them. One afternoon, while examining the latest report, Charles called one of his most trusted aides. He asked directly about the degree of independence enjoyed by Camilla's office. The answer only deepened his thoughts. The aide confirmed that for a long time her office had operated with quite wide powers and little interference from other supervisory bodies. Most financial decisions were handled internally, and very few records were shared more widely. Charles said nothing further. He merely nodded and told the man to continue watching. When the door closed, he sat in silence for a long while. He realized that the old paper alone could not support any conclusion. But combined with the present method of working, the picture grew far more suspicious. Camilla might not have broken the law, yet she was keeping financial control within a private sphere so tightly sealed that oversight was almost impossible. In the days that followed, he observed her more closely. Camilla still maintained a calm exterior before the public, but when they were alone, she became quieter. Sometimes she asked about the progress of his work, her voice gentle, yet carrying a note of inquiry. Charles answered briefly, revealing nothing. He knew that if she discovered the review was underway, everything would become more complicated. He began to consider the next step. The examination needed to be widened. Older records must be examined to discover when this closed method of operation had begun. If it were only a recent habit, it might be explained. But if it had existed for a long time, then the paper Andrew had produced might not be an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern. That night, Charles stood by the window of his study looking out at the dark garden. He felt the pressure weighing on his shoulders. As king, he had to protect the transparency and reputation of the royal family. As a husband, he was facing the possibility that the person he had trusted most was concealing something. Those two roles conflicted within him, and he knew that sooner or later he would have to choose. In the days that followed, details that had been hidden began to emerge more clearly. Charles instructed his trusted team to analyze every expenditure of Camilla's office over the past few years. The results made him sit in silence for a long time. Many items of expenditure, large and small, passed through the same circle of staff close to Camilla. Most of them had worked for her for years. Money was approved, transferred, and accounted for almost entirely within that closed loop. Very few records were released for other supervisory bodies to examine. There was no sign of money vanishing irregularly or of clearly forged invoices, yet the method of management left Charles increasingly uneasy. Transparency was almost non-existent. He began to suspect that Camilla deliberately maintained financial control within a private sphere in order to avoid scrutiny. That practice, combined with the paper nearly 30 years old, formed a picture that was hard to ignore. The reality behind that paper was more complicated still. Nearly 30 years earlier, while negotiating the divorce settlement, Camilla had turned to someone with close connections to the royal family at the time. That person had helped her use information and positional advantage to apply pressure, forcing the other side to concede more than usual. Her purpose then had been clear: to protect her financial position after the collapsed marriage. It was not blatant illegality, but she had unmistakably exploited her links with the royal family. Andrew Parker Bowles had discovered the matter long ago. He had kept silent for many years. Recently, however, his company had fallen into serious difficulty. He approached Camilla, produced the old document, and demanded money to keep the secret. Camilla refused outright. She stated clearly that she would not be blackmailed even by a former husband. Their meeting was tense. Andrew warned that if she did not cooperate, he would take the matter elsewhere. Camilla still did not yield. That was why Andrew had decided to see Charles. Charles did not yet know all those details. He saw only the irregular signs and the old paper. He did not confront her at once, fearing she would have time to cover her tracks. Instead, he ordered the review to be extended further into older records, to discover when the closed system of operation had begun. The following days passed in a heavy atmosphere. Camilla still kept a composed face before the crowds, yet inwardly, she was watching closely. She knew Andrew had failed in his attempt at blackmail, and guessed he might have taken the matter to the king. One evening, when they were alone in their private rooms, the already strained air grew tighter still. Camilla spoke first, her voice no longer gentle. "You're investigating something that concerns me, aren't you? Don't think I haven't noticed." Charles looked straight at her, his voice low but firm. "I simply want everything to be clear. If you have nothing to hide, there is no need to ask so many questions." Camilla stood up, her voice rising. "Clear? Or are you using an old piece of paper to cast suspicion on your own wife? Do you think I will stay silent while you dig up the past like this?" Charles did not yield either. He placed his hand on the table and spoke each word distinctly. "Your reaction is excessive if this is only an old matter, and the recent changes in your office only make me question further." The argument quickly became sharp. Camilla accused him of lacking trust and of allowing others to set him against her. Charles insisted he could not overlook signs of a lack of transparency. Both voices rose. Cold words were spoken in the room that held only the two of them. At last, Camilla turned away, her shoulders trembling slightly. She said nothing more, yet fear showed clearly in her eyes. She feared the review would go too deep, feared the old matters would be completely exposed, feared that her present position would be shaken if everything came to light. When the review was extended further into the past, Charles began to look at the paper Andrew had given him with different eyes. He sat for hours at his desk, the lamp shining on the yellowed pages. He recognized a repeating pattern. It was not only the divorce of years ago. In many later periods, whenever financial matters arose, Camilla had always kept everything within the circle of those closest to her. Records were rarely shared fully with outsiders. Access to information was restricted. Anyone outside that circle could scarcely grasp the whole picture. He found no evidence strong enough to conclude she had broken the law. Yet the prolonged lack of transparency over many years was what left him unable to rest easy. If that method of working were merely a habit, it could be explained. But if it had become an established way of protecting personal interests, then the paper Andrew produced was only the tip of the iceberg. Charles decided to continue the examination in absolute secrecy. He still lacked evidence firm enough for a conclusion, and he did not want Camilla to know the review was approaching the most sensitive matters. Every step was carefully calculated. Only a few of the most trusted people were given the task. During the deeper inquiry, an unexpected name appeared. It was a secretary who had once worked directly in Camilla's office, responsible for part of the financial records. She had left her post not long before under rather sudden circumstances. Charles ordered her to be found discreetly. The meeting took place at a private location, away from all attention. At first, the former secretary was cautious. She sat upright, her eyes repeatedly glancing toward the door. I'm not sure I should talk about these things. She began, her voice low. The person sent by Charles reassured her. You will be protected. No one knows of this meeting, and there will be no consequences if you tell the truth. She was silent for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Her voice, still trembling, began to recount. While I was working, Queen Camilla several times instructed me directly to handle certain expenditures, specially. The records had to be arranged so that only the inner circle knew the whole picture. Some papers relating to approvals had to be kept separately and not entered into the general system. I was told not to discuss them with anyone outside. She admitted she had carried out the instructions, but a few months earlier, when she began to ask questions about certain irregular items, everything changed. I only asked lightly about a few items that looked odd. She continued, and the very next week I was moved, then let go on the grounds of restructuring. No one explained clearly. I wrote to ask again, but received no reply. The moment I spoke up, my position disappeared. That testimony left Charles silent for a long time. This was no longer suspicion based on a general pattern. This was direct confirmation from someone who had carried out the orders. Camilla had not merely maintained a closed system, she had actively controlled it and removed those who might become a risk. The evidence was still insufficient to prove criminal wrongdoing, yet it was enough to confirm that the lack of transparency was no accident. Charles ordered the former secretary to be protected and the details she had supplied to be verified further. The trust that had once been solid now shook hard. Charles remembered the years they had weathered public opinion together. He had believed their relationship rested on honesty. Now, each new piece forced him to look again. He did not want to believe that the woman who had stood beside him for so many years had maintained such a way of acting. Yet reality was compelling him to face it. The paper, nearly 30 years old, had opened a door, and the former secretary's testimony was pushing him deeper into what lay behind it. At the same time, after the argument with King Charles, Camilla was no longer merely passive. She began to realize that something was happening behind her back. Small changes in the way records were being requested, unexpected questions from senior staff, and Charles's increasingly prolonged silences were enough for her to sense the pressure. She did not ask directly. She did not react publicly. Instead, she began to act with caution and calculation. First, certain members of staff responsible for finances in her office were transferred. It was not sudden dismissal or noisy change, only internal adjustments explained by the need for restructuring or new professional requirements. People who had held important records were moved to other posts. New people were brought in who knew less about the old methods. At the same time, she ordered a review of all the files in the office. Some documents were rearranged, some expenditures were shifted to a new system of management. The result was that comparison with older records became far more difficult. Links that had once been easy to follow were now broken or blurred. There was no sign of blatant destruction of evidence. Everything was done within a reasonable framework that could be explained by the needs of the work. Yet to Charles, those moves no longer looked like coincidence. He recognized them at once. Charles suspected Camilla was trying to narrow the traces that might work against her. He had no direct proof that she had ordered files to be erased or altered. Everything was carried out skillfully through several layers of intermediaries, making any firm conclusion extremely hard. But the coincidence of timing and method was too clear for him to ignore. He did not make a public accusation. He understood that if he stepped forward too early, Camilla would have every reason to rebut him, and public opinion outside might be drawn into a controversy that would do the royal family no good. Instead, he chose another course. Quietly, he limited the approval powers of Camilla's office. From now on, every large expenditure had to pass an additional check at a higher level. The new procedure was applied without wide announcement, yet its effect was immediate. The flow of money was tightened. The autonomy her office had once enjoyed was visibly reduced. Camilla felt the pressure almost at once. Expenditures that had once been processed quickly were now delayed. Requests for approval were returned for additional paperwork. She did not show anger in public, yet in private meetings, her voice began to carry clear tension. One evening, when they were alone, she spoke. "What are you doing? These changes are making my work unnecessarily difficult." Charles looked at her for a long moment and answered briefly, "I simply want greater transparency. If there is nothing to hide, there is no reason to object." Camilla was silent. Her eyes hardened. She did not argue further that night, but Charles knew she understood. The distance between them was no longer only suspicion. It had become a silent confrontation, each side calculating the next move. In the days that followed, the atmosphere inside the palace grew heavier still. Camilla continued to present a calm face to the public and fulfilled her official duties. Yet inwardly, she kept adjusting. Some work was shifted to other channels. Some records were processed under the new procedures, making any tracing of the past increasingly complicated. Charles watched it all. He did not intervene in every detail, yet neither did he step back. Each time she narrowed a trace, he tightened the control another notch. He understood the risk. If he continued, the relationship between them would be hard to restore. If he stopped, the suspicion would remain and might spread. As king, he could not accept a financial system lacking transparency inside the palace itself. As a man who had once trusted Camilla completely, he was paying the price with the peace of mind and the affection he had once possessed. The silent confrontation continued. There was no noise, no public charge. Only two sides quietly strengthening their positions, and no one knew which would have to yield first. When Charles tightened financial control, Camilla's reaction no longer retained its former restraint. In a private meeting the following day, she spoke directly. Her voice was no longer gentle. "You are using a paper nearly 30 years old to strip me of authority. You are turning something long past into a tool to control me. This is unjust and shows a complete lack of trust," Camilla said, looking him straight in the eye. "I am still queen, still your wife. You cannot treat me as a suspect without foundation." Charles listened without interrupting. When she finished, he placed on the table everything the review had gathered. It was not clear evidence of criminal wrongdoing that could be taken to court, but a consistent chain of logical signs. "I am not accusing you of breaking the law," he said slowly. "But the way you kept the finances within a closed circle limited outsiders access to information, and then made personnel and record changes precisely when the examination was going deeper. None of that can be mere coincidence." Camilla denied it at once. The personnel changes were ordinary restructuring. Rearranging the files was a work requirement. "There is nothing to hide. You must stop this investigation immediately." Her voice was firm, yet Charles saw the uncertainty behind it. The moves that had occurred exactly while the review was underway only deepened his loss of trust. If there truly is nothing wrong, he asked again, "Why did you act at precisely that moment? Why did everything become harder to trace the moment I began to dig deeper?" The argument continued. The air in the room grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. Camilla's voice trembled, but remained hard. "You are destroying everything we have built. You are allowing suspicion to ruin it all." Charles answered, his voice low but decisive. "I cannot allow a lack of transparency to continue inside the palace itself. The title remains, but real power cannot rest on a closed system that lacks oversight." After that meeting, the decision was taken. King Charles removed Camilla's independent control over her finances. Her office was placed under strict supervision. Every large expenditure now required higher approval. The autonomy she had once enjoyed was significantly reduced. The decision was carried out quietly, without wide public announcement. Yet inside the palace, everyone concerned felt the change clearly. Camilla retained the title of Queen. She continued to appear at the king's side at official events and was still received according to protocol. Yet most of the real power and influence had been set aside. Decisions that had once belonged to her now passed through more layers of control. Her voice in internal matters grew lighter. The gap between title and actual authority became clearer than ever. In the days that followed, the atmosphere inside the palace altered. There was no noise, no public accusation. But the silence carried a different weight. Camilla appeared less often at internal meetings. Charles continued his work with an outward calm, yet those closest to him noticed he was no longer the same. The decision brought no relief. It was simply the choice he had been forced to make when suspicion had piled up beyond the point of being ignored. The paper, nearly 30 years old, had set the entire chain of events in motion. It was not enough to condemn, yet enough to open a quiet investigation. And that investigation had led to an outcome for which both sides paid a price. Camilla lost real power. Charles lost the trust he had once held. The royal family still stood firm before the public eye, yet inside the balance had shifted. If you were in King Charles's position, would you continue to trust Camilla or quietly investigate to the end after seeing how strongly she reacted to this document? In a sea of videos, I am so glad YouTube managed to bring this one to you. We pour a tremendous amount of care into researching every single detail of these royal histories. I know using a TV remote takes a little extra time, but your likes and subscriptions are the ultimate motivation for our team to keep creating careful, high-quality stories for your screen. Thank you so much for your support.